Flight tracking data captured something unusual on February 12, 2026. 4 Canadian CC-130 Hercules transports landed at CFB Suffield, Alberta, within 3 hours. Military cargo aircraft, flying from CFB Trenton, Ontario, landing at a base just 85 miles from the Montana border. No official announcement, just planes delivering troops. According to Defense News Analysis published February 13th, Canadian Armed Forces have quietly moved over 800 personnel to forward positions along the U.S. border since January. Not for exercises, not for training. According to sources who spoke to the Globe and Mail, these deployments are classified as, quote, operational readiness posture. Operational readiness means forces are positioning for potential real-world tasking, not simulated scenarios, which represents a fundamental shift in how Canada views its southern border, and it's happening in complete silence. According to CBC News from February 10th, the Department of National Defense has declined to comment on specific troop movements near the border. Declined to comment. That's the exact language militaries use when operations are sensitive enough to require operational security, but too visible to deny completely. Here's what triggered it. On January 28th, President Trump posted that the U.S.-Canada border is, quote, totally open and dangerous, and suggested deploying American troops. According to Politico reporting from January 30th, Trump specifically told advisors he wants military personnel at northern border crossings to, quote, stop the flow immediately. The flow he's referring to is illegal crossings. According to Department of Homeland Security data, apprehensions at the northern border increased 143% in 2025 compared to 2024. That sounds dramatic until you see actual numbers. Total northern border apprehensions in 2025 were approximately 23,700 people, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection data. Compare that to the southern border, where over 2 million apprehensions occurred. The northern border represents roughly 1% of total illegal crossing activity across both borders. But percentages don't matter to Trump. According to Axios reporting, he views any increase at the northern border as evidence Canada isn't securing the boundary adequately. And he's not just talking. According to The Hill from February 4th, the Pentagon has been asked to prepare options for deploying National Guard units to the Canadian border, deploying National Guard to the border between 2 NATO allies. That hasn't happened since the War of 1812, when the countries were actually fighting each other militarily. Canada's response was immediate. According to CTV News from February 8th, Prime Minister Trudeau called any suggestion of militarizing the border, quote, completely unacceptable. But Trudeau didn't stop at statements. According to National Post reporting, he ordered the Canadian Armed Forces to develop contingency plans for border security scenarios. Contingency plans mean preparing military options if diplomatic de-escalation fails, which means Ottawa is planning for situations beyond normal peacetime bilateral relations. According to Global News from February 11th, Canadian defense officials activated reserve units in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, specifically for potential border deployment. Reserve activation is significant. Reserves are part-time soldiers, called to active duty only when regular forces need reinforcement for sustained operations requiring extended presence. The locations matter. Ontario shares critical Great Lakes crossings, where 40% of all U.S.-Canada trade flows. Quebec borders 5 U.S. states, including New York and Vermont. British Columbia borders Washington state and controls Pacific access routes. Those 3 provinces represent the economic core of the entire bilateral relationship, worth $773 billion. According to Reuters from February 9th, Canadian officials privately warned American counterparts that unilateral U.S. troop deployment would be seen as, quote, extraordinarily provocative. One senior Canadian official told the Globe and Mail that deploying American military to the Canadian border without coordination would represent, quote, the most serious crisis. The official wouldn't finish the sentence on record, but the implication was clear. This would be unprecedented in modern U.S.-Canada relations going back decades. And here's what makes this genuinely alarming. The U.S.-Canada border is 5,125 miles long. It has 119 official crossing points and thousands of remote sections without barriers. According to Canadian government data, approximately 400,000 people and $2.5 billion in goods cross the border every single day through official ports of entry alone. That economic integration is why the border has remained essentially unfortified for over a century. Both nations benefit from keeping it open and flowing smoothly. But that openness is exactly what Trump is targeting. According to his Truth Social posts, he's concerned about what he calls security vulnerabilities at remote crossings. According to court documents from recent smuggling prosecutions, organized networks are guiding people across remote sections of the border for fees between $8,000 and $15,000. That's a black market economy. developing along a boundary both nations have historically treated as essentially transparent between allied democratic countries for generations. Now here's the detail that reveals how serious this has become. According to flight tracking data, those 4 CC-130s that landed at CFB Sewfield on February 12th weren't empty. They carried personnel from one Canadian mechanized brigade group based at CFB Edmonton. Mechanized brigade means troops with armored vehicles and heavy equipment for sustained operations. The Canadian Armed Forces haven't publicly confirmed what those troops are doing at Suffield, but Suffield is a forward operating base with direct access to border regions. And according to satellite imagery analyzed by open source intelligence researchers, vehicle activity at the base has increased significantly since early February compared to January. More vehicles means more personnel, means more operational capability being positioned within rapid deployment distance of the actual border crossings themselves. If you're watching this, drop a comment. Is this border tension real or just political posturing? And hit that like button if you want to see how this plays out. February 11th, 2026. Satellite imagery captured 8 LF-6 armored vehicles positioned at CFB Wainwright, Alberta, just 200 miles from the Saskatchewan-Montana border crossing. LF-6 is Canada's primary infantry fighting vehicle, 8-wheeled, heavily armored, equipped with 25mm autocannon, not surveillance equipment, combat vehicles designed for force protection. According to open-source defense analysts monitoring satellite data, those vehicles weren't there in January imagery. They appeared between February 8th and February 11th. That's a 3-day window when Canadian military moved combat-capable armored vehicles to a forward base within rapid deployment distance of the American border. The Canadian Armed Forces haven't explained why. According to CBC News requests for comment, the Department of National Defense cited operational security and declined details. But here's what makes those 8 LAVs significant. According to Canadian military doctrine, a LAV-6 company consists of approximately 100 personnel operating 14 to 16 vehicles. 8 vehicles represent half a company. That's not a token symbolic presence, that's a functional military unit capable of sustained operations with firepower and mobility. And Wainwright isn't the only location. According to Defense News Analysis, similar vehicle movements have been detected at CFB Shiloh in Manitoba, near the North Dakota border. Now, let me show you what triggered this. According to The Hill, reporting from February 4th, the Pentagon was asked to prepare National Guard deployment options for the northern border. Those options reportedly include positioning up to 1,500 National Guard personnel at key crossing points in states including Montana, North Dakota, Vermont, and New York. 1,500 troops doesn't sound massive, but according to military analysts, even symbolic deployment of American military to the Canadian border sends an unprecedented signal. The signal is that Washington views the border as requiring military security rather than civilian law enforcement, fundamentally changing the bilateral relationship. Canada is reading that signal clearly. According to Reuters from February 9th, Canadian officials warned that any unilateral U.S. deployment would be met with, quote, appropriate measures. Appropriate measures is diplomatic language that can mean anything from formal protest to reciprocal military positioning to economic retaliation, depending on the context. And here's where economic leverage enters the picture. According to U.S. Census Bureau data, Canada is America's largest trading partner with $773 billion in two-way trade in 2025. That's more than with China, more than with Mexico. Canada supplies 60% of U.S. crude oil imports and 25% of natural gas, according to Energy Information Administration data. According to CBC reporting, some Canadian officials have privately discussed potential leverage points if tensions escalate, including energy exports and critical minerals. Energy is the most obvious leverage. According to Natural Resources Canada, the country exported 3.8 million barrels per day of crude oil to the United States in 2025. That represents 60% of all American crude imports. Disrupting that flow would spike gasoline prices across the United States within days, according to Energy Market Analysis. Canada also supplies critical minerals. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, Canada provides significant percentages of American potash, uranium, nickel, and aluminum imports. These materials are essential for everything from nuclear power to electric vehicle batteries to defense manufacturing. No quick alternative sources exist for many of them. And then there's defense integration. According to North American Aerospace Defense Command data, U.S. and Canadian forces operate jointly to defend North American airspace 24/7 continuously. NORAD has existed since 1958. It's the deepest military integration between two sovereign nations anywhere on Earth. Both countries depend on it for early warning and air defense. According to defense analysts, any serious rupture in U.S.-Canada relations would force fundamental questions about whether NORAD can continue functioning as currently structured. The Arctic is where this gets genuinely concerning. According to Canadian government statements, sovereignty over Arctic territories is a core national security priority for Ottawa. And according to Reuters analysis, Trump has previously suggested interest in Greenland and made comments about Arctic resources that Canadian officials found, quote, deeply troubling. One senior Canadian military officer told the Globe and Mail that any perception of American designs on Canadian Arctic territory would be, quote, an instant red line. Red line means non-negotiable, the kind of issue that justifies serious response, including military positioning, to demonstrate sovereignty and capability to defend territorial claims. And trust is eroding fast. According to Nanos research polling from February 7th, only 32% of Canadians view the United States as a reliable partner currently. That's down from 68% in 2020, a 36-point collapse in 5 years, the steepest decline in Canadian public opinion toward America in modern polling history. According to sources who spoke to the Globe and Mail, some Canadian military officers are privately expressing concern about American intentions regarding the border and sovereignty. That questioning creates operational uncertainty. If Canadian planners can't assume American goodwill, they must plan for scenarios where American forces might act unilaterally. And according to Jane's Defense Weekly analysis from February 12th, Canada's recent military movements suggest exactly that kind of contingency planning is now actively underway. The movements aren't large enough to threaten American forces. They're positioned defensively near key border crossings and infrastructure Canada needs to protect if crisis occurs. But positioning itself is the signal. Deploying military forces near a border changes the entire dynamic of any potential confrontation, making situations immediately more complex. February 9th, 2026, a U.S. Border Patrol helicopter crossed into Canadian airspace near Portal, North Dakota. According to CBC News, the aircraft remained in Canadian territory for approximately 4 minutes. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police filed a formal diplomatic complaint. According to CTV News from February 10th, the complaint cited unauthorized entry into sovereign Canadian airspace. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection response, the incursion was unintentional and resulted from crew navigation error while conducting routine Border Patrol operations. But according to sources who spoke to the Globe and Mail, Canadian officials viewed the incident as potentially deliberate provocation given the timing. That helicopter incursion occurred just 3 days after Trump posted about deploying troops to stop illegal crossings. The sequence suggests increased aggressive posturing, and it's not isolated. According to Radio Canada, reporting from February 7th, Canadian authorities detected increased U.S. military aircraft activity near the border throughout January. Canada is responding. According to National Post from February 12th, the RCMP has increased aerial surveillance operations along border sections in western provinces. And according to Department of National Defense sources who spoke to CBC, Canadian military drones have been deployed to monitor cross-border activity in difficult areas. Military drones monitoring the U.S.-Canada border. That represents a fundamental shift from how both nations have managed the boundary for generations of peaceful coexistence. Now let me show you what's happening at actual crossing points. According to local news from Sweetgrass, Montana, border wait times have increased significantly. According to truckers who spoke to Montana Public Radio, inspections have become more thorough since early February, opening containers and checking manifests line by line. That increased scrutiny creates delays. According to Canadian Trucking Alliance data, average wait times at major crossings have increased by 45% since the beginning of February. According to industry estimates, every hour of a border delay costs the trucking industry approximately $100 per vehicle in combined expenses and lost productivity. With thousands of trucks crossing daily, those delays translate to millions in additional costs being absorbed by companies and ultimately passed to consumers. And individual travelers are facing longer questioning. According to Windsor Star reporting, wait times have increased and questioning has become more detailed at Ontario crossings. One frequent crosser told reporters, quote, "I've been crossing for 20 years for work and I've never been asked this many questions about why I'm going to the U.S. The economic impact is measurable." According to preliminary data from Statistics Canada, cross-border travel decreased 8% in January 2026 compared to January 2025, and businesses are noticing. According to Canadian Chamber of Commerce survey data, 34% of companies engaged in cross-border trade report increased concern about border reliability. According to supply chain managers interviewed by Financial Post, some companies are exploring alternative routing through Mexico to avoid northern border uncertainty. Rerouting through Mexico adds cost. But, according to logistics experts, some companies calculate that predictable longer routes are preferable to unpredictable shorter ones. Now here's where it connects to military positioning. According to defense analysts, Canada's troop movements near the border serve multiple purposes simultaneously. First is deterrence, showing American planners that deployment will face Canadian forces already positioned. Second is reassurance to Canadian citizens that sovereignty is being defended. Third is operational preparation. If tensions escalate, having forces pre-positioned means Canada can respond rapidly rather than scrambling to deploy from distant bases. But defensive posturing carries risks. According to international relations scholars, military forces near borders create potential for accidental escalation through misunderstanding. A training exercise misinterpreted as preparation for incursion. Equipment movement viewed as aggressive rather than precautionary. Signals misread between opposing forces. And communication between U.S. and Canadian military commands is reportedly strained. According to sources who spoke to Defense News, contacts between senior officers have decreased. Decreased communication means less clarity about intentions. According to former defense officials, that increases risk of routine activities being misinterpreted as threatening. The U.S.-Canada military relationship has historically featured unprecedented transparency through NORAD and NATO frameworks. That transparency is now eroding under political pressure. So, where does this end? According to defense analysts, 3 scenarios are most likely over the next 30 to 60 days based on current trajectory. Scenario 1 is diplomatic de-escalation. Trump and Trudeau negotiate a joint border security framework that addresses American concerns while respecting Canadian sovereignty. According to experts, this requires both leaders compromising publicly, which becomes harder as rhetoric escalates and domestic political pressure increases on both sides. Scenario 2 is managed tension. Both countries maintain military positioning near the border, but avoid actual deployment, creating a frozen standoff that persists indefinitely. According to historical precedent, frozen standoffs can last years, but require constant management to prevent incidents from spiraling into larger confrontations accidentally. Scenario 3 is escalation. American troops deployed at crossing points. Canada responds with reciprocal deployment. Economic retaliation follows through energy and trade restrictions. According to economic modeling, Scenario 3 would cost both economies tens of billions within the first quarter alone through disrupted supply chains and trade. The question is which scenario Trump chooses. According to Politico reporting, advisors are divided between those urging diplomatic engagement and those pushing military demonstration. And time pressure is building. According to The Hill, Republican senators are demanding action on border security before midterm campaigning begins in earnest later this year. Political pressure for visible action may override strategic caution about risking the most important bilateral relationship America has with any country economically. Meanwhile, Canadian forces continue positioning. According to the latest satellite imagery from February 14th, additional equipment movement was detected at CFB Petawawa in Ontario. Petawawa is home to the Canadian Army's Special Operations Regiment. According to defense observers, movement there suggests Canada is preparing elite rapid response capability. And according to sources familiar with government planning, contingency scenarios include potential responses to American military presence at major economic choke points. Those choke points include the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit, the Peace Bridge in Buffalo, and the Pacific Highway crossing in British Columbia, where trade concentration is highest. Controlling those crossings means controlling the economic relationship. According to trade data, just 5 crossing points account for over 70% of all U.S.-Canada commerce. According to the Globe and Mail from February 13th, one cabinet minister said privately that economic leverage remains Canada's most powerful tool if tensions continue escalating. That leverage includes the 3.8 million barrels of oil per day that flow south, the critical minerals that American defense industries depend on, and the integrated supply chains. But leverage works both ways. According to American officials, the United States remains Canada's largest trading partner by an enormous margin, making economic confrontation costly for Ottawa. The question is who blinks first. According to former diplomats, neither leader can afford to appear weak domestically, creating dangerous incentives toward escalation over compromise. And the military forces positioning near the border aren't just symbolic. According to operational assessments, they represent real capability to complicate any unilateral action. Those forces create what military strategists call facts on the ground, physical realities that constrain options and increase stakes for any decision to proceed with deployment. The longest undefended border in the world is quietly becoming defended. Not yet with troops at every crossing, but with forces positioned within rapid deployment distance. 8 LAV-6 armored vehicles at Wainwright, transport aircraft flying to forward bases, reserve units activated, drones monitoring cross-border activity, equipment moving to Petawawa, all happening without major headlines, all building toward a confrontation that nobody wants, but that both sides are preparing for because neither trusts the other not to act first. And the clock runs on both sides. Trump faces pressure to demonstrate border security. Trudeau faces pressure to defend sovereignty. Both face elections where appearing weak costs votes. According to polling data, this is one of few issues where both American and Canadian domestic politics align in demanding strong action rather than diplomatic compromise. That political alignment creates momentum toward confrontation. The question is whether strategic calculation can overcome political incentive before positioning becomes actual deployment. February 15th, 2026. The border remains open, trade continues flowing. But the military forces moving into position suggest both nations are preparing for the day when that changes.